So along the way from Singapore and Toronto, please welcome Miss Caroline and Miss Katina from the HJM Asia Law and COLLC. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mahesa, for moderating this panel today, and thank you for Georgina to putting it together and being so patient with us. And I'm very happy to be speaking with Katina. We'll be with our expert on immigration. I handle more business and commercial work, Singapore and Southeast Asia, while Katina handles more immigration work. So that's why we're talking together today. So maybe Katina, you want to start? We're going to move to.
Yeah, we'll take a look at the roadmap for today's seminar. So I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here. Caroline and I were in Jakarta a little over a year ago, and a lot's changed in the world, but what hasn't changed is that Canada is still wide open and welcoming immigrants. So we're going to talk about what's happened in the last year, and then we're going to look at just touch on the Canadian immigration landscape in general, because immigration is a central pillar of Canada's and the current government policy, which was just announced about 7 to 10 days ago, is not to reduce or restrict immigration goals, but to in fact increase them for 2020 through to 2023. The majority of immigration in Canada falls under the economic class, which is why today we're going to touch on skilled workers and tradespeople. They fall right into economic class, which accounts for almost 60% of the numbers coming in every year. And then on those, we're going to look at the eligibility criteria, the point system, and the non-point system for tradespeople. We're going to look at some recent changes that have gone on in the programs, and going to try and give you some best practice tips if that's the area you're particularly interested in. And then we're going to circle back to student immigration. And you can see really clearly that the policy the government policy with respect to international students is they place a very high value on the international students, and it's also considered a pathway to permanent residence, which is why we folded it into our presentation today. And then and students, there's been interesting, again with COVID in the last 9 months, we've really seen how agile the Canadian government's been with respect to immigration on the student fronts, because they are temporary residents, not permanent residents like skilled workers or tradespeople would be, but they've been afforded and extended many privileges of permanent residents that we would normally see for permanent residents. And we're going to look at some professional guidance issues and next steps. And then we're going to give the floor over to you guys to try and address some of the questions that you may have on topic. So moving on to the next slide, we're looking at Canada in 2020. So, like with the rest of us, it's been an interesting year, and despite restrictions to entry due to COVID and the closure of the US-Canada border for the first time ever in the history. And from an immigration perspective, Canada's actually on track of meeting its ambitious goals that it set 4 years ago, and that, as I mentioned, that it's just announced that it's going to increase. So generally speaking, we continue to enjoy political stability. We're home to highly educated, flexible, multicultural workforce. We're the 9th largest economy in the world, but we're still a relatively small population. And I say that, of course, with a big smile to an Indonesian audience, because at 38 million people in Canada, our population must seem very small relative to the 200, and I think Indonesia's at 268 million. So what the takeaway from that statistic is that Canada, who has an aging population and low fertility rates, we figure we're gonna have negative population growth by 2034. So immigration has been identified as critical for the growth of our country. And so broadly, immigration to Canada falls under three categories. You've got family, humanitarian compassionate, which is refugee, and then there's economic immigration. And economic takes the big chunk of the spaces that we have. Temporary programs are designed to welcome visitors, students, and workers. So there is a path in for workers on a temporary, from a temporary perspective. But today we're going to be talking about it from a permanent perspective. There are various federal programs and streams, and what I can say is that the key attraction really of coming to Canada, other than our white winters in most parts of Canada, is that permanent residents have immediate access to the social services that we enjoy in our country. And they enjoy the same constitutional rights and protections as citizens. There's publicly funded and available health care, primary, secondary school education available to permanent residents, citizens, and interestingly enough, and we'll touch on this when we touch on the students, also for children, dependents of foreign nationals who come here to study, also share these same benefits. For permanent residents, post-secondary tuition is the same as domestic. It's no longer at an international student level. And permanent residents are provided with settlement assistance if needed, and that's focused on assisting with language training. English and French, of course, are our national languages here. Caroline and I both speak English and French. And housing and employment is also part of resettlement. So, moving on.
So one thing that I would like to add, I know we have about 40 people on the screen right now, and of course it's always nice when we can be in person, because we can know, we can do a raise of hand and how many people are considering Ontario or British Columbia or the province of Quebec. It's great to have a feeling of the crowd. I know we cannot do it now, but if of course you want to ask questions to Katina and myself later on by email or something, will be available, because each province will offer different things in terms of lifestyle. Katina has been living in different provinces, so it has a great experience in the day-to-day life of these. They also studied in different provinces. So if you have any question, we'll be happy to address them.
On that point, it's when foreign nationals are looking at coming to Canada, even though the population's small, the geography is, as Caroline just says, it's huge. It's very broad. And specifically when you're looking for students coming in, it's so important to understand the province and the local culture of where you're coming. Because it will help you identify, the schools and the institutions, so that it'll help inform how you're going to plan your your strategic plan. And also, as you'll see, because Canada is split into provinces, and because we have a division, a separation of power between the federal government and the provincial government, and in the realm of immigration is shared between both. And so specific provinces are able to have and design special programs to attract certain types of workers or certain types of students. So it's really important to understand that piece of it when you're looking at mapping out your pathway to Canada. So moving on. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to really jump right now into the primary economic program, skilled foreign worker. So skilled foreign workers. So this is a program. It is a federal program, so it applies across the country. So once you've been granted the status, once you've come in through this program, unless you've attached yourself to a provincial nomination, immigration is across the country with full mobility rights, because it's something that's guaranteed in our Constitution. So what we see with skilled workers and trade workers, immigration is growing. It's been growing year over year, over 5% year over year for the last 5 years, and it's on track to increase going forward. So 3 of the top 5 source countries of federal skilled workers in the last 2 years are in Asia. India, China, and the Philippines together amount for almost 44% of the skilled foreign workers that have come into Canada. So keeping in mind that diversity is one of the pillars of our immigration policy, it would be nice to see another country with a large population come in and make some inroads. The plan for 2021 to 2023 that was just announced is they're looking at increasing the target number of immigrants to welcome, economic immigrants to welcome, to about 208, 210,000, and that's being increased to 220 for 2023. So the big question is how do you put yourself into this plan? So for skilled workers, the underlying drive is to select immigrants with the ability to become economically established. That's actually the definition of skilled workers, ability to become economically established. So it's about filling labor shortages and possessing a target skill that Canada has identified as needed in the future. And so, as we mentioned, the provinces have maintain their own lists and have their own set of circumstances. And then the federal government also has broader policies for the country as a whole. So for coming in as a skilled foreign worker, it's a point-based system. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but Canada was the very first country in the world to design a point-based system for immigration. Australia adopted it shortly thereafter, and the United Kingdom has just redesigned their immigration programs for skilled workers in the last 2 years, and have adopted now a point-based system similar to the Canadian and the Australian. And so what this means, the point-based system, is that it's an assessment system, classification system, and it's based on six particular selection factors. It's education, so it's looking at the foreign national who's interested in coming to Canada under a skilled worker stream. They're going to be assessed based on their education, their level of education, higher points for higher education achievement, their language is always English and French, and Canada is very, very keen to bring in bilingual, if possible, or people who have the ability in French. In the last 6 months, we've seen the express entry system, specifically for federal skilled worker and federal trade people, increase the points that you can get significantly if you have French as a second language. When we say French as a second language or English as a second language, vice versa, we're not talking necessarily fluency. We're talking we're talking it's not basic French, but what we're talking about is having demonstrated that you've acquired enough skill based on an interest that it's something that you're going to score high enough on a language test that's not necessarily going to put you in a category where you'll be able to work or function in it, but that it's that you'll be able to use it as part of your launching pad in your toolbox to accumulate points to come to Canada. Third selection criteria is work experience, and then there's age is another consideration, and arranged employment. And then there's an outlier selection of criteria that gives you points, and that's for adaptability, which is a sort of a metric that's determined, and that's how the Canadian government, or the immigration department, when they're looking and trying to design in any given year, specifically the types of workers they're looking for, they're able to use this adaptability criteria to either give more points for certain types of work experience or more points for language skills such as French, which is what they just did, or change it for education. So given the 6 selection criteria, it's important to understand that our system discriminates essentially for age. I don't like to say that as I'm a little bit older, and I don't necessarily agree that from a policy point of view it should be the way it is, but pretty much you're looking at is if you're over 40, you're going to get no point for age, and that's going to reflect in the fact that you're going to have to make sure then that your work experience, your language, and your education is going to offset that. And also keep in mind that 6 years of work experience is the top point, gives you top points. So you can see there from just looking at it from that lens that the scales are in favor of growing a younger educated workforce. So I think I just wanted to mention that. But the real scoring occurs once you're qualified into the pool. And so in order to qualify, it's for a federal skilled worker program, really what you're looking at is you need to get 67 points out of a possible 100 on the 6 selection factors. And so the thing that I like to explain, or that I like to make a point of when you're looking at skilled foreign worker, is that it all starts with being able to properly classify what your work position is, what your skill set is, based on your work experience. And for this, because different countries all over the world call different positions different things, in Canada we use something called the National Occupation Classification System. Short form, the acronym we use is NOC, N-O-C. And the irony is it wasn't designed for immigration per se, but practically speaking, it is the benchmark or the starting point of any assessment, because it is what is used to assess the work experience and to identify whether or not you have the potential to qualify for the eligibility criteria in this class. So what I urge you all, if you're interested in looking at it or exploring it coming to Canada as a skilled foreign worker, I suggest that you take a look at the National Occupation Classification System. There's a website, you just type it into Google and you'll go, and what you'll see is that there's 400 job titles in 500 occupational groups, and you need to really very clearly understand where your work experience aligns, because this is where a lot of mistakes are made. This is the metrics that the immigration officers who are making the assessments are looking at. And so it breaks down into 4 skill levels. You've got skill level A for I think it's important to understand this because it fleshes out later when we start talking a little bit more about how to navigate the programs. Flushes out into skill level A, university education, university educated. Skill level B generally is college or technical school or apprenticeship training. C is high school or occupational specific training, and skill level D is when you have short training or on the job training. And so practically speaking, if you're at the point where you're considering and you're looking at coming to Canada under one of the permanent residency streams, you're going to need you're going to need to have your education and your language assessed. So for education, it's called educational credit assessment. There's about 5 or 6 companies or global companies that provide this service. And what they do is they look at your education in Indonesia or whatever other foreign country you went to, and they do an assessment of what it would equate to in terms of Canada, and they give you a certificate for that. And same with language. With language, you do there's a few CELPICs, IELTS. You do your English language and or French language tests. You get a result. You get certificate numbers. That's really the starting point. You're not going to go into you're not going to be able to be assessed for eligibility without language tests and an educational credit assessment. And then the next step is to make sure that you've properly ID'd the relevant NOC code for your particular skill set based on your work experience to date. And then that will give you an idea of whether or not you will likely not only be eligible but competitive in the pool, because that's what the point system is all about, is to create a competitive pool that can be accessed. And then and if you're not competitive from the onset, from the starting gate, it doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. Then you know that you need to be looking at that 5th selection criteria for eligibility, which is arranged employment or chasing something called a nomination from one of the provinces, where the provinces so identify based on your skill set and other factors. They're specifically looking for whether or not they're essentially going to give you like the golden ticket or they're going to give you a nomination to welcome you to their specific province so that you can use your energy and your skills to become economically established
Katina, I just have a quick question. You just mentioned the provinces. So which one would be very friendly for, which one would be, like you said, depending on which provinces you apply. So is there any specific province that will require, I don't know, nurse or restaurant manager or accountant or?
It's a very good question, and the answer is that broadly speaking, right now, so the federal government right now is introducing pilots to bringing agricultural workers right across the country, right across the country. Nurses or healthcare, anybody in healthcare, nurses is again right across the country. In British Columbia, for instance, what we see is they're very focused on tech workers. They're very focused on engineers. You've got mining. You've got the forestry industry. In Ontario, what you see a lot more what were traditionally professions that like professional white collar work that they have an in demand list. The other thing is, what I can say is just full disclosure across the country, Alberta has actually in the last 4 or 5 months, in reaction to COVID, is the only province who has specifically started to reduce its in-demand list and actually create a list of professions where they will not allow foreign workers to come in and work at right now until their particular provincial economy is stabilized due to COVID. But we're not seeing that in the rest of the country. The Atlantic provinces have specific Atlantic programs where they're bringing in truck drivers is one that is heavily recruited, will fall under arranged employment because we've got employers who are also engaging with the system to recruit internationally. And so by the nature that they're going to be located in a particular province, they'll start bringing in to fill the labor shortages that they're experiencing. Oh, and also in the last 2 to 3 weeks, when the Minister of Immigration made his announcements for the plans moving forward, there was a real focus on the smaller communities and the municipalities sort of outside of the 48th parallel line. And they're developing pilot programs to target and welcome foreign workers, specifically skilled foreign workers and tradespeople.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sure it's enlightening to the attendees, because Canada is such a big country, so they can assess which province has more chance to get where they could go. Thank you.
All right then, so we're going to move on to the next slide, where we're going to look at the skilled tradespeople. So unlike the federal skilled worker class, foreign workers under the federal skilled trade class are not assessed on points. So again, though, with them, and when we say that is they're not assessed on points, what they're assessed on is they're assessed on what their specific skill is, and then what their actual work experience is, and then the idea is there's always eligibility and competitiveness. So the 67 points you need as a skilled worker to enter into the pool, for skilled tradespeople, the eligibility criteria they're not going to be assessed on points. So again, the first point of reference for tradespeople is that NOC, the National Occupational Classification System, because the program is designed to attract workers with a skill set that falls into a skilled trade occupation. So what that means is, and why I mapped out the 4 different skill levels, is that's skill level B. So there's 6 major categories in skill level B. So it's not just taking any tradespeople, it's specific trades. And so the 6 trades, the 6 groups that come under skilled trade occupations under that skill level B is, you've got the industrial and construction trades, which includes electrical, maintenance, and equipment occupation trade workers. You've got technical occupations in national sciences and agriculture. And then you've got manufacturing and utilities industries, where you're looking at specifically the supervisors or the control operators. And then you've got 2 other minor group categories that fall under trades, which are chefs and cooks and butchers and bakers. And so other than qualifying in terms of work, the type of work that you do, if you are interested in coming in under this stream, you need to meet minimums for actual work experience. And so the minimums is you need to have at least 2 years of full-time, or the equivalent of full-time, or the equivalent part-time of 2 years full-time in the last 5 years. Language requirements are much lower, benchmarks are lower than for skilled worker. Skilled worker essentially starts at the Canadian legal benchmark of 7 and goes up from there with points allocated. For tradespeople, or for trades workers, you're looking at CLB 5 for speaking and listening, and 4 for reading and writing. And also keeping in mind 4 was the points, the minimum points you need to get bonus points for both languages, right? So that sort of gives you a sense of where the benchmark is for that. And then the other thing is there's also, and this is what a lot of people miss when they're looking generally at coming in under this category, there's also a criteria that you meet what we call the relevant employment requirements. And again, that goes back to the NOC and the classification, because certain occupations, certain trades will require trade certification, and if they're not requiring trade certification, they may be fine with Canadian work experience. But in the case generally, I'm thinking of the audience we're speaking to right now, we're not looking at people who've got the Canadian work experience. That's why they're coming here to get it. So what you're looking at is what is the relevant trade certification for a particular trade. And so if the NOC occupation specifies that a certificate of qualification is required, then the next step you're going to do is you're going to look at the specific province you're looking at coming into, whether or not and what it is that they're looking for in terms of that. So an example of this, let's say, is a certified master baker, right? So a certified master baker must have relevant trade certification that is recognized by Canada, unless, of course, they have Canadian qualifying work experience. Depending on the province, though, Ontario does not require trade certification, but British Columbia requires Red Seal certification, which is an internationally recognized certification, or they will accept a certificate of apprenticeship. So the key here when you're looking at transitioning in or under a federal tradesperson stream is you need to understand where your specific trade falls into the spectrum with respect to what the relevant employment requirements are, both on the federal level and the provincial level. So again, the key here is you're going to need to get an educational credit assessment. So even though there is no, even though there's no minimum education level that falls underneath this, from a practical point of view, if you're coming into it and going into the express entry pool, you only get points for post-secondary and up. So, or you get points for secondary, and then post-secondary and up is where they really start to escalate and increase. So you're going to need the ECA, the Educational Credit Assessment, to get full bonus points, to get points for those skills. You're also going to need your language test results so that you can demonstrate that you've got the 5 for speaking and listening and the 4 for reading and writing. Otherwise, you won't meet basic eligibility criteria. And the other point that I would say that's important to understand when you're looking at coming in as a skilled tradesperson is that provincial nomination here is often the key to securing this as your route in and settling as a permanent resident, because the provinces will actively recruit specific trades from the express entry pool. And they also have a direct application process outside of the pool to obtain provincial nomination. And so moving on to the next slide, we're just going to take a look. I know I've spoken.
I think we have about another 10 minutes. It's almost, so maybe we can just move on the process, and then we can move to the students, maybe a few minutes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So we touched on the express entry. The express entry in a nutshell is its eligibility. You get into the pool. There is, I checked actually just before this presentation. Right now there's about 45,000 people in the pool. We pulled 5,000 out a week ago. The federal government issued invitations to 5,000. A week before that, another 5,000. So that's what you're sort of seeing, that there's absolute movement. So the key is to get into the pool. So your eligibility criteria gets you into the pool, but getting into the pool there's no fee to enter the pool. But the key here is being in the pool doesn't get you even doesn't even get you the ability to submit an application. You need to be competitive to do that. And to be competitive, it's based on what your rank is going to be in the pool, which is determined by points. So if we move on to the next slide here, you'll see where we're talking about receiving the invitation to apply. This is really, the key point here is that this is where strategy comes in, because you really want to understand what it is you're chasing and where you want to get a proper assessment on where it is you're going to likely fall into the ranking, because it's a moving target. Sometimes points are higher for, sometimes they're drawing specifically tradespeople, sometimes they're drawing specifically skilled worker. The points will fluctuate, and from your point of view as candidate in the pool looking to secure an invitation to apply, you don't want to go into the pool too early, because there's also, you've got to take into consideration the timing of your language tests, whether or not they're going to expire. There's expiration dates that happen that are built into the system. I'm just trying to kind of go through the big points here. Also, whether or not you're going to be chasing.
So, I have a question. So Georgina will help us on the ground about the expiration of the language test, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's where people mess up once they've submitted their applications, because they forget about the timeline processing. So what ends up happening is you want to make sure that your language tests don't time out, and then you've also got medicals that may time out. You've also got police clearance certificates. So there's a real strategic piece to how it is you're going to manage the process, because receiving the invitation to apply seems like you're almost at the end gate, but the reality is you've got 90 days to submit your application. You submit your application, and yes, the Canadian government has a target to process it in 6 months, but the reality is what happens is once you submit your application, you're not in the clear at that point. There's something called an R10 completeness check, and it's a failure. And so what happens at that point is that if any specific documents are missing, or if anything is not timed appropriately, or if you've identified the wrong knock code, anything that does on an initial check, because the government is essentially the gatekeepers. The immigration officials are gatekeeping the process. You get a rejection of the application, which also results in a termination of your express entry profile, and you have to start the process all at the beginning. And so what you want to make sure is that you understand your full strategy and how all of the pieces fit in from the front end, so that you're not going to come across any unfavorable surprises along the way. So that being so, you're also, I just want to say, you're either chasing arranged deployment for points, or you're chasing provincial nomination, and that's comes down to strategy and really knowing how to navigate the system and knowing what you're looking for and how to connect with both the provinces and or the Canadian employers. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next slide. The next slide is, I kind of touched on the two-step express entry process. So the next slide is students. And so students, international students are highly valued in Canada. There's currently over 700,000 foreign students studying in Canadian institutions. What I want to say here is that when we're talking about study permits, we're not talking, if you're coming here to study for less than 6 months, you don't need a study permit, but that won't set you on a path to permanent residency. The other key thing here is that the criteria for eligibility is that, one, you have to apply before you enter the country. COVID changed this because of the travel restrictions, but for those of you who are currently outside of Canada, the changes or the exemptions, although they're notable, they likely don't apply to you. The first thing is to obtain a letter of acceptance from a designated learning institution, but not all schools are qualified designated learning institutions. And so this is where it becomes really, really important to understand what program you're applying for, because before COVID, there were 2 classes of designated learning institutes. Now there are 3. And why I say this is you're not going to find this on the IRCC website explaining it this way, but at the end of the day, this is what happens. There are higher learning institutions that have the ability to issue study permits so that you can come in for the purpose of studying. And in the past, there's always been a false assumption that a designated learning institute that could qualify for issuance of a study permit also allowed you to qualify for a postgraduate work permit. And that's not true. There's essentially 2 lists. There's 2 classes of designated learning institutes. So what you don't want to do is you want to avoid the pitfall of coming here, spending the time, energy, and money of studying on a valid study permit at a designated learning institute, and then find out that it doesn't actually qualify you to extend that and to transition into a work permit, an open work permit situation postgraduate, because the designated learning institute isn't on the right list. And so that's the point that I make there. And when I said that there's 3 classification systems, now in COVID, what we've seen, it didn't exist before October 1st, actually. Now there's also technically a 3rd category of designated learning institutes, those who have been able to present a COVID readiness plan to the province and the federal government, have it approved, then get on this list, because if you're sitting outside of Canada with a valid study permit and you're looking to start studying in January or February, your study permit document in and of itself will not necessarily allow you to enter Canada because of the travel restrictions, and that's when it becomes key to make sure that you're looking at a designated learning institute that's on the list. The point here on the slide where it says work experience in NOC O, A, or B for a postgraduate work permit, you've got to remember a postgraduate work permit is an open work permit. So you could do any skill level of job. But if you're sitting there on a path to permanent residence, there's no point in working as a cleaner or working as a barista from the point of view, using your open work permit to do that, from the point of view of that work experience. Essentially, it's as if you're not working from an assessment point of view to then qualify you for permanent residence moving down the pathway. So I say that, and I kind of put that all out there because it's really important to understand that if you're looking at coming to Canada to study, you want to understand how the pathway works and what the pathway is and where the pitfalls are, and so that you can tactically and strategically design to avoid those.
But you know what? I think are we still okay with time, or we can just, I think what is really important is like if we can just brief us on professional guidance, the option and how we can be careful and
Okay, yeah, so the next slide, professional guidance. Coming through to professional guidance is, what I can tell you here is representation is not mandatory. You don't need to use an agent. You don't need to use a consultant or a lawyer to submit an application or a visa application or a PR application. The default for the Immigration Canada is that representation is not mandatory, but remember, mistakes are costly, both in terms of time and money, and next steps, and that when applications fail, most applications a significant amount of the applications that are failing not because are failing on technicalities because of either not understanding how to navigate the system, not submitting proper documentation, not submitting for the appropriate program. Immigration tends to be complex because it's layered, particularly with the federal and provincial, and because there's over 700 programs and streams to come into Canada. And so what I would say there is that it's critical to understand why applications fail and to plan that in, and that the other thing is professionals. There's only 2 professionals who are qualified to give immigration advice and to represent on a file. That's either a Canadian lawyer who's a member of a law society, and so your practice tip here is always go on to the provincial websites and make sure that whoever it is you're working with is actually qualified and is listed, or a regulated Canadian immigration consultant who can also be checked. And the key here is if you are using an agent who is not represented, or you're not disclosing that you're using an agent, all you need to do is do a search of Canadian case law, particularly recently, because it's going through both the provincial court systems and also the federal court systems. People who, it's the workers, it's the candidates who are penalized for using unauthorized representatives in rejections of applications, but then also sometimes they are hit with misrepresentation bans. So don't let yourself fall into that. Understand also that it's the onus is on you as a foreigner. There's no privilege or entry or privilege of entry for a foreigner into Canada. The onus is on you to prove that you have sufficient funds, the right intention, the validity and the feasibility of the plan. And so you generally want to deal with people who are doing this and who represent on this regularly, because they'll know the metrics and the tests. And then the other thing is they're also able to, in the event you do get a rejection, they'll be able to navigate the redress, which is either reconsideration requests or a federal court judicial review. And that is brings us to the last slide there, because we're coming to the end of timeline. We're just looking at, so what are the next steps with respect to, if you're interested, if anything that we've said in today's seminar is of interest to you. The beautiful thing I can tell you is that we're very, very lucky and privileged to have on the ground support in Indonesia, because especially with the translation of documents and making sure that all the supporting documents are appropriate, duly notarized, sworn, where necessary, that we have somebody on the ground that can essentially work hand in hand with pulling all those requirements together. So what we do is, first step is to book an initial consultation. And really, this is really just about understanding what your options are, assessing them, and mapping out your pathway without missing a beat, with avoiding the pitfalls, and mapping it out with timelines, and also building in a refusal plan. We know what the rate is of refusals coming out of Indonesia for temporary visas, and also what the refusal rates are coming out and reasons coming out that are processed in Canada on the federal level, on the permanent level. And we infuse that into the way we assess the situation and prepare the timing of an application. We generally, in immigration, contrary to other types of law, we generally start with flat feeing consultations. But COVID, we're always available, Caroline and I, by video call, but particularly now during COVID, it seems to be the rule, not the exception anymore. And step 2 is following an assessment and a mapping out of what the path of the plan is then it's the retainer of representation. It's representing you so that when your application goes into the Canadian government, it goes in with full representation. Representation means that there's you've got somebody chasing them for answers, chasing them for updates, making sure that as policy guidelines change or there are broader changes that are going on, that you're on top of that. And it really is just making sure that you don't need to spend your time trying to figure out what's going on with immigration. You've got professionals who are doing that for you. Really, that sort of brings us up to the point where that's the end of our the talking points that were prepared. Caroline, do you want to add in on the professional guidance piece?
No, I think you cover. Thank you. We have a few questions, in fact, from various people, and I just want to put a big disclaimer. Like, we don't have whatever, I will answer. Like, we have this little blurb of questions. So it's going to be difficult to give like, oh, yes, you're going to be able to get that citizenship or you'll be able to get this work permit. So this is not the equivalent of a consultation, just so you know.
Okay. So, by the way, before we continue to the Q&A, so I guess Ms. Georgina had something to share before we continue the Q&A.
Wait. I've already put my list, my link in the chat box here. I put it again. It's okay.
Yeah.
I have some questions that people usually ask me, but I think you better go ahead with your questions, and then if there's time left, then I will ask. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, maybe you can reshare it again, Ms. Georgina.
Yes.
Because maybe some of them just join us a bit later, so they couldn't just catch up your statement at the initial time. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, okay.
So yeah, want to continue? Okay, that's it. Okay, so everyone, if you want to ask further regarding this for the consultation, maybe we can have a separate discussions with Ms. Georgina privately into the other Zoom link. So you can check, everyone, you can check to the Zoom group chat. So in here, she mentions about the Zoom link chat and https://zoom.us/s/914245480009, and this is the meeting ID. Okay, actually we've got lots of questions, including the one that's sending to my private chat. So let's say I want to start to answer all of the questions. Yeah, Miss Caroline and Miss Katina, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, Mr. Manurung, actually he's already 56 years old, and he said, is there any opportunities to live and work in Canada? His background is high voltage electrical field, and he just retired from his job as production manufacturers and technical customer support for high voltage air insulation switch breaker. And then he had 30 experience in electronics and electrical manufacturing. So anyone want to answer?
Sorry, so what the question is you're asking specifically if he meets eligibility?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so as I said in the presentation, the first thing that we need to know is if we're talking about skilled worker or trades, We need to know what's the language level, what's the educational. Like it's you need to go through that selection criteria grid, and you need to make an assessment. So the good news is he is in a profession with a set of skills that is in demand in a lot of places in Canada, which means that he will probably likely get the attention of an employer, and he can then engage with getting arranged employment to make up for the fact that his age is going to essentially his age factor needs to be offset. So what I would say, looking at that, like I would sit there, and I would generally, when I see people who are over 40 with significant experience in a that type of, I would say that I would really focus the strategy on arranged employment and provincial nomination, and we there's thousands of people coming in, and that where those make the difference. And so, but it's a matter of laying it out and setting it up so that you know that's what it is that you're doing.
Okay, that's great. So
can I just jump in? I'm sorry, I was just took a look at the chat because I know we're going to run out of time, and I just saw a really good question that I kind of glossed over in the presentation. It was a question from Chandra.
Okay.
She mentioned that she was a fresh graduate with no working experience, and she wanted to know if she was able to work in Canada. And so what I would say is if you're looking at, so when I see fresh graduate, no working experience. So with no working experience, you're not coming in as a skilled worker or as a skilled tradesperson. So that's the first thing. But what you can look at Canada for is post-secondary, is postgraduate education with either a co-op piece to it or an internship piece to it, because the thing is Canada, unlike other Western countries, is when you come here as a student, you're able to work up to 20 hours a week on campus or off campus, so long as you're pursuing your full-time studies. And you're also allowed to work 100% on school breaks, and every student knows that school breaks, there's a lot of them peppered into the year. And so what I would say to Chandra is that, you know, you're looking at doing it two ways. You're either going to have to spend the next minimum 3 years accumulating work experience so that you can then stream into one of the permanent pathways, or you can choose to do that in Canada. And if you come here under the student journey is, if you select it and you navigate it appropriately, it's your more certain pathway to permanent residency.
Okay, got it. So better to start from the university, as you mentioned.
Well, you know what? Better to start from that. But the only reason I went there with her question is because she started with, I have no work experience, I have no job experience, which means she hasn't determined that she'll be able to economically establish herself in Canada. So that's where that ends. So,
yeah, I got your point. So, so is that okay to re-questioning the other questions from other participants?
Sure, go ahead. Why don't you you pick 2 questions, and then we're going to have to wrap it up because we're already...
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Annabelle. I want to ask about the employment rates for foreigners. What are the employment rates for foreigners being hired, and which province has the highest employment rates for foreigners?
I would say, it's funny actually. You've got to remember that when foreign workers come to Canada, they have to be paid the same. We don't make a distinction here. In fact, in the workforce, very few people actually know. There's not a distinction. There's not a distinction that's generally made. I would say that Ontario probably has the highest amount of foreign workers, just from the size of the economy here, and British Columbia would probably then be next. What are the employment rates for foreigners? Well, the employment rates fall into when you sit there and you look at how many are coming in, under the economic program. So the employment rates are not tracked for foreigners versus, because once you come here under one of the permanent resident programs, you're a permanent resident and then you're folded into the general statistics. So I'm not there's no discrimination in our system. Once you arrive as a permanent resident, there's no you're not considered a foreigner. You're considered a permanent resident.
Okay, got it. Yeah, because they already changed the status to the
Yes.
PR, so that's why there's no
Yes.
specific the employment rates or whatsoever. Yeah.
Okay, so last question. Does somebody have a burning question out there?
Burning. Not really sure actually for the burning one. So let me get to the last. What do you think? From
I think
maybe
there was one about a person with a financial controller and someone working in tech with a key account manager.
Mr. Hani.
Know.
Mr. Hani Merlian.
Oh yeah, so you're looking at that one, financial controller project management. What I would say is financial controllers, they are often on the in-demand list. Like I know that Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, it's a skill set that is readily available, and there is a shortage in Canada for those positions. So what I would say is you can either look under for a temporary. You can either. So really, I mean, today we talked about permanent residents. You're definitely federal skilled worker class. That's what you're coming in under. The other thing that, and I didn't touch about this on the presentation, but I mean, you're a perfect example here as a financial controller for this. The key is when you're looking for arranged employment, or when you're going to connect with a Canadian employer, a Canadian employer is going to sponsor you is going to process what we call the LMIA, the Labor Market Impact Assessment, to bring you over so that you can get the points qualified for the job. They're going to support you for permanent residents, but they're also going to likely bring you in as a temporary worker, and they're going to, instead of just applying for and getting a document for permanent residency, they're going to get a dual intent LMIA, because what we see is Canadian employers are using the pool and the express entry pool as part of their international recruitment efforts. And also the provinces and the provincial nominee systems. Saskatchewan's a good one actually for financial controllers as well. They're looking at recruiting, and so the first step is to, instead of doing it temporary work first and then to permanent, you're able to anchor yourself with a permanent application and process that then in a way claws back, and it forms the basis of your application for a temporary for a work permit. So a work permit is the visa you're looking for to come in immediately without waiting for the determination made on a permanent resident application. But and that's also where it comes from, making sure that you're dealing with somebody that understands really how the system works and how your set of facts fit into that. And I don't mean to like go back to that and sound like it is what's the word, self promoting, but really the first thing you should do when you're looking at, first thing I require if a financial controller were to come to me is I'd want to see the resume 100%, and I would start from there, and then I would look at, and I would sit there and I would look at, because ideally when you come to Canada, you want to come to Canada so you can hit the ground running. Hitting the ground running is an employer sponsoring you, giving you a job. Not giving you a job, but hiring your skills. And so then attached to that, you generally get transportation, and it helps with settlement. So if you can tie temporary pathways together with permanent pathways concurrently, that's the ideal. So that's how I would interpret Mr. Meliana or Hani. I don't know if it's a Mr. or a female.
It's a male.
Oh, it's a male. That's how I would I would start to approach and assess your situation that way. So thank you very much for your time, and Mahesa, thank you very much for your moderating and running our program today. And Georgina, thank you very much for organizing and being there on the ground and coordinating. And Caroline, thank you very much for checking in from Singapore. It's nice to see you. Caroline and I talk quite regularly, so it's
thanks to you to be awake in the middle of the night for us.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, because we are running out of time, so sorry. So everyone who wants to ask further about this, maybe you can contact Miss Georgina regarding this. So Miss Georgina already shared the Zoom link for the further questions or further discussions or consultations. So
sorry, can I just jump in here? I just noticed a email. I was gonna say that if any of you guys have any specific questions and you want to interact one-on-one, really the best way to reach us is by email, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah. So let me repeat. So cberube@hjmasialaw.com. So that's for Miss Caroline, and then K Hunter Sutcliffe at hjmasialaw.com.
Yeah, it's just right here on the. I think the presentation is still there.
Yeah, you can contact them directly actually regarding this, and also if you want to call them directly to the maybe in Singapore office, Miss Caroline, because you're in Singapore.
Yeah, sure. Well, as Katina mentioned, we work with Georgina. Emails is best.
Okay.
Yeah, because of the time difference, we don't want to call Katina in the middle of the night.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, I guess emails, then we can just reply promptly.
Yes, you're right.
And of course, any question you have with Georgina, you have her email, and she was kind enough to share WhatsApp.
Yeah, definitely. So in here, is it a WhatsApp? So there's a WhatsApp for the cell here, the cell phone here, Miss Caroline? No.
Yeah, it's this one. It would be this one here, the Singapore one.
Yeah, okay.
But Georgina sent her WhatsApp as well.
Yes,
in the chat group. So.
Oh yeah, that's Miss Georgina WhatsApp. So maybe if you guys want to talk, maybe in Bahasa first, maybe, and you want to talk maybe privately, or maybe you can talk with, you can discuss with Miss Georgina. Okay, I guess we are running out of time, and thank you so much everyone who are participating for today, and including our reputable speakers and beloved speakers, Miss Caroline and Miss Katina, and also Miss Georgina.
Yes, and we're going to go online after this. I've already shared my link. This is an international link, but everybody can join.
Yeah.
If you want. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for organizing Mahesa and Georgina. Good night.
Good night.
Night, good day.
Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mahesa.